Good afternoon. My name is Lily Flanagan, and I'm going to be examining the Stonewall movement in the 1960s and its direct impact on queer individuals today. So the Stonewall movement really focuses on providing solidarity and empowerment for queer individuals at the time and community support, as well as fighting discrimination. And I wanted to connect the main problem that the movement is focusing on to a case study, a client that I'm actually working with right now at my social work internship, but for confidentiality purposes, I am changing his name. So his name is not Angel, but in the presentation it is. So Angel is impacted by being stigmatized and discriminated against for being queer. And some background information: he is 21 years old, he's a Latino male, he is pansexual, he has a history of being bullied for being gay with his peer community and also his family, devaluing him and not accepting his pansexuality. And this has created intense depression for Angel, intense anxiety, and most importantly, has created intense suicidal ideations for him, due to the lack of support that he has, due to the lack of being valued and being seen as someone who's worthy, and due to feeling not valued and not worthy because of the judgments and the hatred that he's internalized from his family, and has internalized the hatred of his queer identity from individuals. This has manifested into intense, severe mental health problems for Angel. And his suicidal ideations is a thing that happens every week. It's a weekly thing, and it's really fueled due to feeling like he's not worth enough and hating himself and hating his identity and the way that he expresses himself. So really, we can see the impact of discrimination and schemas and stigmatizing Angel and how it has affected his mental health. So like I said, the Stonewall movement really focuses on fighting for queer civil rights and against discrimination. And the movement started on June 28th, 1969 in NYC. Specifically, it started at the Stonewall Bar, where police were raiding the bar and arresting people inside the bar. And it started on June 28th. That's when the police came into the bar and raided. And in response to that, the individuals outside the bar acted on anger and rage, and they got vocal while the police officers were arresting the individuals inside the bar. Quoted from Encyclopedia Britannica, they began to jeer at and jostle at the police and then threw bottles and debris at them. So in a more specific goal, they were fighting against police infringement upon queer community hubs at the time, as well as protecting queer civil rights and social discrimination. So, and this was happening even before. Like, police had been raiding queer bars at the time a lot, but this was a big one that created representation in our world today, obviously. And so after the first night, this happened for another 5 to 6 more days. The individuals outside the bar really kind of protesting and fighting for their rights. And so after these 5 to 6 days, the movement kind of died down until the initial yearly Pride Parade began in 1970, which the parade was in celebration for the activists in the 1969 Stonewall riots. So because the parade was celebrating this movement, the recognition and the activism for the riots came up again. So I wanted to briefly mention the organization that started the Gay Pride Parade that celebrated the Stonewall riots. And it was the annual Reminder Day Pickets organization that was founded by Eastern Regional Conference of Homophile Organizations. And they were able to do it through creating the committees and voting, and they were eventually able to pass it and make the Pride Parade happen. So really, the Stonewall movement had its pros, 100%. And we'll get into the cons, but I wanted to talk about the pros first. Because the parade was celebrating the Stonewall movement, the first parade, it really created recognition for the Stonewall movement. And if we didn't have the parade, we wouldn't really know the riot as it is today. So we really have to thank the picket committee to create this for us. And after the first Pride Parade, there was more complex stories of movement development, more activism, not only in the United States, but the world. And the Stonewall movement is ingrained on the plaque outside Stonewall Bar today. The movement and the activism at the time you see in newspapers, books, movies, in education, obviously, as well, not just in social work, but in many other studies like history. And the Stonewall riot also gave recognition, didn't start, but gave recognition to the gay liberation movement, which is a very big activist movement that is still essential today for the queer community. So moving on to the movement critique and the things that I would change. For first, this movement, as we know, really focused on queer activism for gay white males, and this creation of gay white male homonormativity. And we could give fault to the Gay Liberation Front for this, because the majority of all of their members were white males. And since this movement was really one of the biggest organizations that was helping to continue the activism after the riots, this led to, further future activism and change for the queer community that really left out Black queer individuals. This also created the illegitimacy of urban Black queer individuals and othering, right? And creating this othering and categorizing people as people who are not legitimate and people who are. And people who were legitimate were white gay males, specifically in the country. And because the movement was so centered in the city, the rural communities outside the city didn't really hear about the riots or reach them. So that's why RFD, published in 1974, was promoting country gay men and was promoting activism for these rural communities, but it led to this anti-urbanism. And also something to note, during the time in the 1960s, the civil rights protests were happening, so Black queer individuals were really focusing their energy on that and not really focusing their energy on this movement, the Stonewall movement. And also there was a misrepresentation. This movement misrepresented the start of queer activism. There was many other organizations, many activists, and many riots that happened before the movement, but because the parade really focused on the Stonewall movement, that's why we know queer activism to start from the Stonewall movement. So, and then of course, this movement focused on identities and rights instead of power. So putting it all together, they weren't recognizing how powerful queer white individuals had over Black queer individuals during the movement, and how much more they had to say and to express themselves. So to conclude, things I would change, letting other people tell their stories, people that were activists and organizations before the Stonewall movement, but because this movement really took place, these people weren't able to tell their stories, and there's a need for these individuals to be heard. Um, the need to be critical and to understand the the extra oppressive identities that some of the targeted population people that you're working for have. And there's a need to look at everyone uniquely and not to bunch them together as all gay, and not understand the other identities that they have that are affecting them. And there's a better and there has to be a better and healthier way to create rural activism in communities outside New York City without publishing RFD, which is a very racist magazine. Okay, so lastly, I'm going to be connecting the movement with social work practice. So after the riots and after the initial first gay pride parade, there was an increase of healthcare advocacy for queer populations and increase of activism in helping in the AIDS crisis for many social workers. There was an awareness of discrimination and stigmas in healthcare settings for queer individuals. There was a change in psychology practices, shifting from a less pathologic view of individuals towards a more affirmative counseling services to better support this community, which led to these individuals feeling acceptance and liberation for themselves and loving themselves more. And there was also an increase in research in queer issues and psychology and mental health settings, focusing more on social factors that are affecting these individuals and not just looking at their individual faults that are affecting their mental health. But with all of this, there's still improvement today that needs to be done, specifically for equitable healthcare for queer people of color. Who don't benefit from these affirmative care settings and therapy, as this practice has been implicitly leaving out Black queer communities because of our structurally racist country and of the gay white male norm coming from the Gay Liberation Front. And this has affected my client's problem, Angel. And as he feels like he's not being heard, or he feels like his health is not being taken seriously and people aren't trying to understand the real problem with Angel's real problem, which is more socially affected than it is individually. So in my practice with him, I've been able to kind of go over social factors that are affecting his problem, which definitely affects him in a better, positive way for sure. Because he knows what's happening and he knows that it's not his fault. And so lastly, I wanted to go over connecting empowerment theory in social work practice, which as social workers we do, to the mission of the Stonewall movement, which is also providing empowerment to the queer community. So as social workers, we're able to kind of accomplish this goal that this movement wants to provide by creating people their own free will to do what they want with their lives, to help them recognize their strengths and the resources that they already have that they're able to use to help their issue themselves, and to kind of be their own driver's seat of their recovery, and to encourage the things that they love to do. So being able to do that, we're able to create this empowerment for these queer clients that we have, therefore completing this mission of the Stonewall movement. And of course, the other one, another goal of the Stonewall movement is providing community resources and keeping these community hubs for the queer community intact. And this is something that social workers absolutely can do. As many are policymakers, many are trying to affect this change and to create safe spaces for the targeted population that they work for, as well in even direct practices, providing group therapy and providing this community that the queer population deserve to have.